Is that someone trying to get in?
I think it's someone to... Should we let them in?
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 8th now debate in the 2022 Digger Debate Series, and the first debate that we've held between the candidates for governor of the state. I'm John Riley. I'm president of Vermont Journalism Trust, which is the governing body for VTDigger. We're very pleased to be here at this fabulous space, the Main Street Landing Performing Arts Center. Over the past year, we've been investing in local news around the state, really. One of our recent events I was at was in Manchester for the U.S. Senate race. But here, more locally, we have added to staff here. We have had a dedicated Burlington reporter, and we have added now coverage, a second reporter for Chittenden County, and one for Grand Isle and Franklin County, because we know that there is an appetite for local news, and we aim to feed that. We've also added in that group to a dedicated editor for that particular group. We're very proud at Digger to be doing a couple of things, really, bringing you that local news and regional news that you rely on, and also sponsoring events like this, where you're able to come and hear directly from the candidates. It's fundamental to our democracy. I want to thank you all for being here and for participating. After this event, Digger has one more general election debate. We're in the late innings here. I heard Secretary Kondo said over 400,000 mail-in ballots went out this week. So it's getting close. But we'll have one more on Wednesday, October 5 at 6 p.m. We'll conduct the online-only debate between the two candidates for lieutenant governor. Two? Yeah, thank you. Good. And for more information on that, please sign up for the live stream at VTDigger.org. Before we get on to the debate, I do want to thank a couple of key parties here. Our sponsor, not just tonight, but through this series, the Crasson Group, which is a top-ranked government and public affairs firm serving clients on issues important to those who work and do business and live in Vermont. And secondly, we'd love to thank the venue, this Main Street Landing Performing Arts Center, just a fabulous place to hold this, their generous support and providing the space for us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you, VTDigger is a nonprofit organization, so we do rely on donations and support and membership from our readers. And so if you're able to and would like to support us, I urge you to visit vtdigger.org/donate, and there are instructions there on how you can help us continue in this mission to provide you the news and these important debates. Now, I'm happy to introduce VTDigger Managing Editor Paul Heinz, who will go over the guidelines, the outline, the rules for tonight's debate, and introduce our candidates and our moderators. Paul.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the members and sponsors who made this event possible. Before I introduce the candidates and moderators, I'd like to briefly outline the format and the rules of this debate. We'll start by asking the candidates to deliver brief introductory remarks focused on a question that we provided ahead of time. We'll then turn to questions that our moderators will pose to both candidates, or in some cases, just one. Candidates will generally have 90 seconds to respond to such questions. The moderators may pose brief follow-up questions at their discretion. They may pose brief follow-ups or, at their discretion, allow the opposing candidate to respond. We'll generally allow those named by their opponent to respond. Such responses will be limited to 30 seconds. Twice during the debate, we'll allow both of the candidates to pose a question to one another. And finally, we expect to end the evening with a lightning round, during which candidates will answer questions in just a few words and, time permitting, closing statements. I know that we're all very excited about democracy in this room, and in some cases, very excited about the candidates themselves. But I would like to ask our in-person audience to refrain from applauding or jeering or otherwise interjecting in this debate. We want to get to as many questions as possible, and we also want to make sure that this remains a civil affair, so we will not be tolerating disruptions. I now have the pleasure of introducing our candidates and our moderators, and here I will make an exception to the above rule and allow for brief and hearty applause for both of our gubernatorial candidates at the appropriate time. Not quite yet, I will tell you. First, we have incumbent Governor Phil Scott, a Republican from Berlin. Governor Scott spent much of his career in the construction industry, helping to run a family business. He represented Washington County in the state Senate for a decade and served another 6 years as lieutenant governor. Scott was elected governor in 2016 and is now seeking a fourth two-year term. Now, you may applaud for Governor Scott. Also joining us tonight is Democratic gubernatorial nominee Brenda Siegel of Newfane. Siegel has worked as a teacher, choreographer, and executive director of the Southern Vermont Dance Festival. She ran for governor and lieutenant governor previously and has most recently served as a state house advocate on issues ranging from housing to substance use disorder to economic inequality. And you may now please feel free to applaud for Brenda Siegel. Now, I hope you have saved up the most applause for the next two people I'm going to introduce here, our all-star moderators, VTDigger political reporters, the best political reporters in the state, bar none, Sarah Meerhoff and Lola DeFore. Big applause for them and for the entire VTDigger reporting team. All right, Sarah and Lola, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. We'll begin this evening with an introductory question to each of you. What do you see as the most pressing issue facing Vermonters today, and what would you do as governor to address it? You'll each have 60 seconds to respond. Governor Scott?
Well, thank you all very much for having us here tonight. From my perspective, the biggest issue facing our state by far is our demographics, because it literally impacts everything. In the last 6 years, we've made record investments in housing, climate change mitigation, prevention, treatment, and recovery efforts, childcare, water, sewer, and stormwater projects, economic development, and much, much more. And we've done all this without increasing the tax burden on already overburdened Vermonters. And we know there's more to do, but no matter the issue or investment, we won't be able to afford any of it if we don't keep and attract more people to grow our workforce. As some of you may have heard from me over the last few years, what we need is more taxpayers, not more taxes. And that's why we must continue to grow the economy and make Vermont more affordable. Every proposal I make to the legislature is looked at through this lens. And if Vermonters choose to re-elect me, they can be assured that me and my dedicated team will continue to offer balance, common sense, experience, and the responsible leadership that Vermonters deserve.
Ms. Siegel.
Thank you all for having me. We can't address any of our challenges until we ensure that every Vermonter has a safe and affordable place to live. On October 14th of 2021, I stood on the State House steps and said that I would not leave until the governor fully reinstated the program that emergency housed people experiencing homelessness. I did not know that I would be there for 27 nights and 28 days. And despite my empathy on the issue, I was vastly unprepared for how quickly my body and mind would begin to decline. What I know is that the housing crisis did not begin with COVID. It has been barreling at us for a long time. And because in press conference after press conference, the governor said he would not reinstate the program, people thought that we could not win, but we won. We need to ensure that we have a long-term and short-term strategic plan that includes emergency, transitional, and permanent housing. Because when our Vermonters do not have a place to live, it is not good for our communities, and it is not good for our workforce.
Thank you. Our first question tonight comes from VTDigger reader. Kathleen from South Burlington writes, a strong and stable child care system is essential to meeting the needs of Vermont's children, families, businesses, and the economy. How do you plan to work to solve Vermont's child care crisis in 2023? Ms. Siegel? Ms. Siegel, you'll go first.
Thank you. You know, the first thing we have to do is that when the legislature allocates money, it should go out the door. Considering the crisis that we have right now, it is unacceptable for that money not to make it to our child care providers. This year, I had the opportunity to support a child care center in my community that was about to close. I led an effort and brought in community members to make sure that that child care center would be able to remain open. We need to commit, not make a goal of having 10% of people's income go to child care. We need a strong workforce, which means we need to incentivize education, training without the risk, and creating additional financial burdens. And we need to make sure that we have mandatory paid family and medical leave for our workers and for our families. We need our wages to be commensurate with what it takes to live in this state, and we need to make sure that people have the benefits that they need. We need childcare to work in order for our families to be able to be part of our workforce and our children to grow up strong and healthy for the future of our state.
Governor Scott.
Well, again, this is something that we've been working on for a number of years, and I fully support a cradle-to-career concept. We need to get to our kids earlier. We need to help them in pre-K and early care, and we've done that. You know, during the pandemic, we proposed and it went forward $12 million for relief for our child care centers. $15 million as well for child care financial assistance to Vermonters in need. And I work with Senator Sanders, across the party, across the aisle, so to speak, to develop after-school programs for our kids. And that was about $10 million, and we did that in 2020. Now, we've been proposing all kinds of initiatives for childcare over the last couple of years. They haven't been accepted by the legislature, but we keep trying. Things like a $1,000 income tax credit for child care workers, $7 million to expand the child care network. And unfortunately, they turned down a proposal when the Wayfair decision happened. I said we should take all that money, all that online sales tax money, that revenue, and put it towards child care. And today, if we'd done that, it wasn't accepted, but if we'd done that, that would have been $30 million a year for child care. So we need to continue to look for ways to properly fund this, and I'm fully supportive.
I'm going to stay on this topic. The advocacy group Let's Grow Kids has set a goal that Vermont families pay no more than 10% of their income on child care. How far would you go to achieve that goal, and would you raise taxes to do it? I'll stay with you, Governor Scott.
Yeah, I don't think we need to raise taxes to do it. I think there's enough capacity within the system. Now, we have to determine, we have to separate want and need, and this is a need, I believe. So we're going to have to do without in some other areas. But I think we have to prioritize, and I think that we can do that. We can find the capacity. Again, over the last, we haven't raised taxes and fees over the last 6 years to try and get us back on track to becoming more affordable. But during that time, previous to that, for almost a decade, we had deficits every single year. Since not raising taxes and fees, we've had surpluses. So we have capacity, we have surpluses, and we just have to prioritize this initiative.
Ms. Siegel, you get the last word here.
It's great that we have surpluses, and we need to make sure that this is a commitment. What I heard recently was that this was only a goal of our current governor, and we need to make sure that we actually commit to having 10% of people's income go to childcare only. And if that means raising taxes to do so, that is for our workforce, that is for our families, and that is for the future of our state. So we do have to prioritize and make sure that we are clear about want and need. And this is a need, and we have to make sure it happens.
Our next question, excuse me. Vermont set state records for opioid overdose deaths in both 2020 and 2021. Public health officials have linked the surge in substance use in part to the isolation and economic shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet Vermonters are still dying at elevated rates, even now. Governor Scott, you vetoed the only passed bill during the last legislative session that would have ordered studies of new policies to address the opioid crisis. With those proposals off the table, what new measures are you willing to try to bring down overdose deaths?
Well, again, I think that's uninformed in some respects. It wasn't really a study. If you read the bill, it was an implementation plan. And I don't think that that's the right strategy from my perspective. I think that we need to be focused on things we know works. And what we were doing pre-pandemic, we were finally seeing the curve, the trajectory bend in the opposite direction. So we're on the right path with our 4 legs of the stool. And that's prevention, treatment, recovery, and enforcement. So we were on the right track at that point. I think we have to double down on our efforts there because it's proven. To experiment in this regard, I think is just wasting time and resources. And if I have to choose between a safe injection site in one city in our state and a place like Jenna's house that really is doing good work, then I'm going to choose Jenna's house.
Ms. Siegel.
As many of you know, and some may not, in March of 2018, my nephew, Kaya Siegel, died of an overdose after a year in recovery. And he was the son of my brother who died just over 20 years before him, also while using heroin. They both suffered from bipolar and severe trauma, and with 20 years between them, we still could not find the supports that we needed in our state so that they could survive. What I know is that we have to focus on harm reduction first, treatment and recovery on demand, including medically assisted treatment on demand, dual diagnosis support, and criminal justice reform. And I just want to say that it was not one bill. There were 3 bills that would have supported people with opioid use disorder, and all 3 were vetoed, despite the fact that this governor has presided over the most death in the history of our state. It is not okay for us to continue to have to bury our children. And in that 1 year that we saw a very slight decrease, we were comparing apples to oranges because we compared the initial numbers to the final numbers. In order to solve this crisis, we have to be willing to study the new solutions, the updated drug policy that has now come for us. I have been working on this issue around the state and country, and I know that we can do more to make sure that our families are no longer burying their children and not experiencing what my family has.
Rebuttal?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I think, again, misinformation in some respects. We do, I believe in harm reduction. We've implemented a number of different steps with harm reduction, whether that's Narcan, needle exchange, fentanyl test strips, because we do need to get to them sooner. But just think about the practical aspect of a safe injection site in Burlington, for instance. This is the most populated city in our state, the largest city in our state. Are they going to come from Essex to drive to Burlington to go to a safe injection site? Are they going to come from Barrie? Are they going to come from Milton? Are they going to come from St. Albans and drive to Burlington to go to a safe injection site? I think not. And I believe that we need to continue to work in those treatment facilities, the recovery facilities, as well as prevention throughout.
Can I respond?
Sure.
One more.
My brother died alone. My nephew died alone. My friend's son, Kalijah, died alone. Safe injection sites have seen lots of overdoses, but not a single death. Every single life saved matters. And what I want to say is that studying what comes up is not an implementation. I did read the bill. I worked on the bills. I know those bills, and they were studies. And you might have found out something that you were not ready to hear, but we aren't in drug war policy anymore. It is time for us to move forward to this century, to what we now know about the overdose crisis.
Did I get one more rebuttal? Check out Oregon. See how they're doing.
Okay, we'll move on now. VTDigger reader Matt Allen writes, I moved from the Northeast Kingdom to Burlington earlier this year. That is to say, from the poorest region of the state to the wealthiest region of the state. What I've seen in both communities is a common struggle to afford housing alongside a seemingly increasingly housing insecure or unhoused population. While the struggle is certainly more visible here in Burlington, This is a statewide issue. What is your plan to address Vermont's longstanding housing crisis? Ms. Siegel will go with you first.
Again, we need to make sure that we have a short and long-term strategic plan to address housing, and that needs to include emergency, transitional, and permanent housing. Right now, due to the fact that several people, thousands of people, are likely to lose their rental assistance by December 1st, we are going to see this crisis of the unhoused explode across our state. We should have already been replicating the pods that are happening here in Burlington across the state. We should be building up pallet housing and making sure we're using dormitories and getting them ready for people that are experiencing houselessness. We should have a transitional plan. And then our permanent plan has to include both rental supports and regulations and homeownership for people from low, moderate, middle, and upper middle income households, because no matter who you are in this state right now, there is nowhere to live, and there is no mobility, and that is not good for us as a state overall. We have seen this go on and on without a solid, clear, strategic plan to end this crisis.
Governor Scott will go to you next.
So when I first was elected, we talked a lot about affordable housing and needing more housing for decades. And I finally said, well, why don't we just do it? And so we did. We moved forward. I worked with the legislature. We had a $37 million housing bond. We thought that was a big deal back then, but that was the single largest investment in housing Vermont has ever seen. That leveraged another $200 million of private assets in order to accomplish that. We've already put on, since then, 2,000 affordable units have been put into place, put into use. We're going to have 4,000 with that money by 2026. This is triple the number of affordable homes every single year. So we have now, with my urging with the legislature, used the ARPA money. I said we need to segregate. We need $250 million of that $1.25 billion to go towards housing. So they went along with me on that, and we put that into place, and we're going to be building that out. So for years to come, it isn't instantaneous. We have a lot more work to do, but that will leverage literally hundreds of millions of dollars more. So I'd say by the time we're done, we'll have invested over $1 billion in some capacity for housing in Vermont, and that will make a difference. That'll make a transformative difference in Vermont, but it does take time. Permitting takes time, and all the infrastructure and the construction takes time as well. So we have a long ways to go, but we're on a path that I think is sustainable.
Staying on that topic, housing experts say that while Vermont's recently federally funded investment in affordable housing was both welcome and overdue, it still won't be enough to meet the need. Are you prepared to make significant and sustained state-funded investments into more housing?
Well, again, I don't think we have the capacity in some respects. We don't have the workforce to build all of the housing that we need, and that's going to be a stumbling block. And that's another initiative. That's probably another question that we should take up tonight because of our workforce challenges, especially in the trades. We don't have the HVAC folks. We don't have the plumbers, the electricians, the carpenters, the excavators, and so forth that we need to accomplish everything we're going to do, especially when you consider the average age of a construction worker today is about 56 years old. Think about that for a minute. And we need to bring more kids into the program, and we need more CTE programs, and we need more training. So we just need more people.
Ms. Siegel, you get this follow-up as well.
Sure. You know, we have to not say, well, throw our hands up and say there is no solution. We don't have the resources to do this. People are unhoused. People are freezing to death. I slept outside on those steps in 19-degree weather, and I have to tell you, I had no idea how hard it was to do something like that. We cannot allow our neighbors and community members to not have the housing that they need. There are emergency and transitional solutions, and we should be using them right now. Throwing our hands up right now when our community members and neighbors are unhoused is not an option.
Rebuttal?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, we do have those safety programs in place. We haven't thrown up our hands. We are working diligently. No governor has put forward as much effort and dollars for housing than I have. And I think our team has done a great job thus far. And we have a general assistance program that is going to continue. Some of what we've seen during the pandemic were emergency programs put forth by the federal government. That money is run out and is running out. So we have our general assistance program that we had pre-pandemic that is still going to be ongoing, and we'll continue to build out in terms of the temporary housing programs that we need.
All right.
Follow up?
Yes.
The pre-pandemic GA motel housing program was not sufficient then, and it sure as hell won't be sufficient now. Let me tell you, because there were people who could not get to those motels. There is not enough shelter spaces. The shelter spaces are full. People are sleeping in tents in the winter, sometimes behind your office. That is not a solution in and of itself. We have a GA working group, which I'm on, and we often aren't included. We're just starting to be included with the crisis that's happening right now. In order to do this, we're going to have to actually work together, even where we disagree, and that is a huge concern I have with the current administration.
All right, I have one last follow-up on this topic. And you get 30 seconds for follow-up questions. The press now routinely report on stories of tenants facing staggering rent hikes or eviction. In August, the Stowe Reporter, for example, published a story about a 93-year-old man who was evicted so that his landlord, who owned more than a dozen rental properties in town, could convert the unit into a more lucrative short-term rental. The elderly tenant had no choice but to double up with a friend. Governor Scott, you've opposed new rental protections. In this market, where tenants often have no place to go and no leverage with which to negotiate with their landlords, do you continue to believe that no new tenant protections should be on the table?
Well, we do have some pretty broad eviction protection programs in place in Vermont. I didn't read that story, but that's uncalled for, unacceptable, and we shouldn't stand for that. A 93-year-old, we should be able to protect. But again, I don't think we have enough. I believe we have enough oversight at this point, and we don't need to have a rental registry, I don't believe.
Ms. Siegel?
Yeah, so I don't know if folks know what it's like when you don't have resources to try to take on your landlord when you are being evicted from your home or when they are not fixing mold in your apartment. But it is not an actual possibility if you are in if you have low resources. And so those regulations and that registry was incredibly important to families like mine, where I lived with my child who's here tonight when he was a baby, and to other folks who are struggling. And that 93-year-old, because we could have had just cause eviction, but it was vetoed by you, those folks get to be protected when we have just cause rather than no cause eviction.
Our next question, kind of along the same lines. In an effort to combat its demographic woes, Vermont has for years now spent millions of dollars annually to attract new businesses and new workers to the state. In this last legislative session alone, the legislature signed off on $3 million for the state's worker relocation program, which pays workers up to $7,500 to move to the state. But employers up and down the state now say they cannot fill the jobs that already exist. And many workers say they are turning down jobs in Vermont because they cannot find a place to live. In this context, do these sorts of economic incentives still make sense? Ms. Siegel.
You know, I think that the economic incentive was problematic in the first place. I was not a huge supporter of it. Though it did bring some people here, it also was a lot of remote work, which didn't fill the jobs in the first round of it. That said, now we do need people to move here and live here which is part of the reason that we have to make sure that we are creating an emergency, transitional, and permanent housing plan. It's why we need to regulate short-term rentals for people who are just buying up buildings or transitioning their apartment buildings to short-term rentals. It's why that we have to have these things like renter registries so that folks are protected in their home when they get there. So yes, there is not enough housing for people to go where they need to in order to work in our different main streets, in our large businesses, anywhere in the state. And that's work that we have to do in part by creating more regulations and more protections for renters.
Governor Scott?
Well, as you might remember, when I first ran for office, I talked about 3 numbers, 6, 3, and 1. The 6, we'll just talk about the 6 for now. The 6 was we were losing 6 workers from our workforce every single day. Every single day. So you think about that, we were losing 2,000 workers every single day or every single year. So this is no surprise to us. Tried to get the attention of the legislature. One person did listen, and that was Senator Sorokin, Democrat on the other side of the aisle. He came up with this program to bring more people in. I fully supported that, and I still do today. We need to bring more people into this state. We can't grow our way out of this in a short period of time. So we're going to have to bring more people in, lure them in, attract them to our state. And it has to be affordable in order to do that. And they have to find decent, affordable housing. That's why we need to continue with the program that we're working on in terms of housing and the billions of dollars that will go towards housing. So again, I'm fully supported Senator Sorokin's initiative, and we've improved on that over the last couple of years, and we need to have more creative thinking in terms of bringing more people into the state.
All right, thank you. Many VTDigger readers submitted questions for this debate about the state's climate policy. Earlier this month, the Energy Action Network released a report saying that Vermont is not on track to meet its legally mandated climate emission requirements for 2030. Governor Scott, you vetoed legislation to create a clean heat standard for the state, and you declined to sign onto the multi-state pact known as the Transportation and Climate Initiative Program. What is your plan to get Vermont back on track to meet its legally binding emission targets within the next 8 years?
Yeah, I didn't veto the clean heat standard. I vetoed the bill that would have allowed the Public Utility Commission to develop a clean heat standard. So it was the legislature punting to the Public Utility Commission that I opposed because it would never come back for the legislative approval or my approval. If they want to, if they want to give their authority away, that's fine. They can do that. But they can't take my authority away to oversee what's been done. So this would have taken, again, the Public Utility Commission would have been tasked with coming up with some sort of proposal for this clean heat standard. And I just find that unacceptable. I think the legislature should deal with it and deal with it head on.
That being said, given that that piece of legislation was vetoed, what is your plan going forward?
Well, we put, again, one of the buckets of money from the ARPA funding, I asked for $200 million for climate mitigation. And they went along with that. And we are investing in EV charging stations. We took the VW settlement money early on when we received that and used that for charging stations all up and down the corridors, the I-89 and 91 corridors, because we thought that was a good place to start. And we're way ahead of other states in that regard. But also, that money will go towards weatherization of homes. So that will help in 2 ways. That will help in terms of carbon emissions, but it also will help people in their homes be able to afford to stay there and pay the exorbitant fuel prices of today in some respects. So weatherization is key. It cuts down on carbon emissions, saves people money, and I think electric vehicles make a lot of sense, and that's the future.
Ms. Siegel? It
was really unfortunate that the clean heat standard was vetoed. Unfortunately, as I've said before, the advisors that the governor had did not inform him that his concerns had been addressed. And the legislature did try to override it, but lost by 1 vote. And one of the biggest concerns I have is that the legislature has to govern by 2/3 majority with this current administration. And it's something we have to change. We also have to increase our public transportation across the state. I sit on the Public Transit Advisory Commission because that supports both our low-income and aging populations as well as our climate goals. We have to make sure that we are not trying to fix this one electric vehicle at a time, because that will not happen. We have to, and our solutions like electric vehicles, heat pumps, solar panels have to make it to our low and moderate income families, or it's not a solution. We also have to support our small farms in transitioning to carbon sequestration and require our large farms to do the same. This is incredibly important because if we don't do this work, we will not meet our 2030 goals. And finally, our Public Utilities Commission has been effectively stopping the build of in-state renewable energy across our state. And so we need to change who is on the Public Utilities Commission so that we are sure we can be ready for the moment that we're in.
Thank you.
Rebuttal?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so the only person, apparently they didn't ask whether it satisfied my concerns or not, was me. The legislature never asked me whether that would satisfy my concerns. So I would have told them at that point that it wouldn't, but they didn't ask. So that's the misnomer there. As far as the 3 people on the Public Utility Commission, I think it's a well-balanced commission, one of them being Congressman Welch's wife, and I think that they've ruled and led well in that regard. But this has nothing to do with them on the commission. It was strictly that it would not come back to us for approval, at least for me or to the legislature. And I think it was just punted the can, so to speak.
Can I respond?
Yes.
Quite frequently, the legislature doesn't know whether or not the bill is going to be vetoed because the governor does not come to the table. And that's a huge problem with the way we govern. We're not always going to agree. I'm sure that if I am lucky enough to become your governor, I will also not agree at times. But I'm always going to come to the table so that at the end of the day, the legislation that our legislature passes is something that you all get to benefit from, because we don't get to benefit from this legislation when we aren't staying at the table till the work is done.
Yeah, I can't let that go. I just can't.
A brief rebuttal.
All right. I meet with legislative leadership every single week. I meet with a pro tem 1 week. I meet with a speaker the next week, and it alternates from there. Every single week we meet, and I tell them clearly what I can live with and what I can't, so they knew exactly where I stood on those issues.
No, I'm sorry. I'm gonna cut it off there.
All right.
I am going to stay for a quick follow-up on this topic, and Ms. Siegel, you actually touched on this. The cost to obtain and maintain electric vehicles, even with the help of state and federal subsidies, remains unaffordable for many Vermonters. For instance, Governor, your all-electric truck, a Ford F-150 Lightning, starts at roughly $47,000, according to Kelley Blue Book. In the transportation sector, is focusing primarily on electric vehicle infrastructure a realistic path forward for Vermont to make a significant dent in its carbon emissions? Should public transportation play a greater role? Governor Scott.
Yeah, we're a very rural state, and I believe that we do have to have vehicles to get to our destinations. Now, it may not be as difficult for those of you who live in Chittenden County, but I can tell you for the other 13 counties in the state, they need vehicles to get around. It's just not practical to have public transportation for their needs. So I believe in some form we're going to have to either go to electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. We don't know. That's not dead yet either. That could be something in the future that could be utilized. So I have great faith in the creativity of America, and we're going down this path, but we need to improve, and it needs to get less expensive. I agree.
All right. Ms. Siegel, you've made your thoughts clear, but if you'd like to elaborate. 30 seconds.
Sure. I live in a rural community. I live in Newfane, Vermont, and I have at times not had a vehicle and not been able to get to the grocery store, not been able to get places. We have microtransit, and I'm actually between two ski mountains, so there's an opportunity for public transportation there. But what I learned while I was on the Public Transit Advisory Commission is that frequently we try things for a year and we don't really put enough education into the public about what that public transit will do for them. There are ways to both increase public transportation and ensure that folks who need vehicles have them. But we has to be both and, not either or.
Thank you both. We'll now have an opportunity for candidates to ask one another questions. Each candidate may ask their opponent one question. These should be questions, not speeches. You'll have 90 seconds to answer. We may ask or allow follow-up questions. Ms. Siegel, you may ask first.
Your administration mismanaged Vermonters' unemployment in 2020, including compromising personal security information. And the legislature allocated desperately needed child care funds that your administration did not get out the door. And most recently, you mismanaged Vermonters' emergency rental housing assistance in their time of need. In fact, your administration said you didn't know how much you were spending and you didn't have it written down. You didn't work with community partners to find a solution, and after public outcry, you suddenly found $20 million. Yet we still don't know how people are going to be housed as we head into winter. In all of these cases, if the people impacted made those same mistakes when they have benefits, they would lose those benefits. How can you justify asking Vermonters to bear the burden of those mistakes?
Well, I knew there's a question in there somewhere. So much for not grandstanding, so to speak, right? So anyhow, we do our very best with the regulations and all the oversight from the federal government. The rules and the money that's been coming in to Montpelier over the last couple of years, and we desperately needed it, and I give great credit to our congressional delegation, Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders, and Congressman Welch, for providing that for us and going to bat for us. But there's a lot to keep up with, and they keep changing the rules. The Treasury isn't clear on what you can spend it on and what you can't, but they are very, very strict in terms of when they decide you can't spend it on something that you can't. So keeping up with that has been difficult. In terms of the $20 million that was referenced, we got creative, and we are going to have to, it's creative financing in some respects. We're going to have to use some FEMA money that we use for something else, reimburse that, so we can free up the $20 million to leverage for more of the assistance in terms of rental assistance. So we just got creative in doing so, and I give great credit to my team for doing that. And again, it's not easy work, but they work 24/7 trying to provide as best they can for Vermonters.
Can I follow up?
Quickly.
Great. When Vermonters don't have prompt unemployment benefits, child care funding, or housing assistance they need, when they don't know whether or not it's coming, that means they're not able to pay their bills. That's the cost of these mistakes. What I'm asking you is how you justify asking Vermonters to bear the burden of those mistakes.
Well, again, if you want to remember where we were at this point in the pandemic, we had 90,000 people on unemployment overnight. The average before that, we were the lowest in the nation, about 1,200 people on unemployment. It went from 1,200 to 90,000 with an antiquated, outdated IT system that we had gone and asked for improvements to that, but it's going to cost $50 million to improve the IT system. So we were turned down for a number of years because we had low unemployment. So we did the best we could with what we had with an antiquated system. So difficult when you have to go from 1,200 to 90,000 people on unemployment almost overnight.
Governor Scott, you may ask Ms. Siegel a question now.
Yesterday, I was at a press conference in St. Albans, and we were discussing how impactful TIF districts were for their downtown. It really has transformed St. Albans. And there are some in the legislature who are opposed to TIFs. some in state office that are opposed. I think our auditor isn't thrilled with the idea as well. And I am a big fan, but I'm wondering, what is your position on TIFs?
I'm going to need you to tell me the acronym.
It's a tax incremental financing, and it's to utilize money that you're going to derive from the improvement and use that for the development itself.
So I am in support of our, first of all, I just want to say that our downtowns, I was in St. Albans recently, and our downtowns, they are doing an incredible job of rebuilding their downtown. And we have a few other towns, Brandon, folks across the state who have really been able to make those differences. And part of it is the TIF. So I am in support of it.
That's great. We see we agree on something.
I'm going to go on a limb and say you don't have a follow-up
I
question.
do not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll have another round of candidate-to-candidate questions in a bit, but for now we'll return to questions for each of you. We're here tonight in Burlington, where public safety has recently been front of mind for many residents and local officials. While overall crime and violent crime in the city have significantly declined over the past decade, the city has seen a greater number of gun incidents this year. Meanwhile, the police department has struggled to fill vacancies, as have other law enforcement agencies around the state. What needs to be done to stabilize or reform, or both, Vermont's public safety infrastructure? Governor Scott, you get to go first.
Well, it really does go back to our workforce shortages, and we're not immune in state government. We have 8,000 employees in state government. We have 800 openings right now, and we have as many people retiring every day as we do hiring every day. So we're just barely keeping our head above water, but I'm very concerned about public safety in particular. We have 65 openings in Vermont State Police, but our dispatch centers are critical, and they're facing a critical juncture in some respects because we can't find enough people to fill the need. So we are doing everything we can to keep the system going. We were at the Big E, the state fair, trying to get more people to join our force, to come to our state. We had Vermont State Police law enforcement there talking with people, and we just need to bring in more people here in order to fill that. But I'm very concerned. Again, funding, we are funding our state police. We have a 10-point safety plan that I put out 2-3 weeks ago. But again, we hit a critical stage here in Burlington. A lot of it is tied to illicit drug trafficking, and a lot of the crimes committed as a result, and a lot of the gun violence as a result. So we need to focus on that. That's why I keep talking about the 4 legs of the stool. But enforcement's also important.
Ms. Siegel?
Yeah, so in Brattleboro, we have been doing some, I live in Newfane, which is near Brattleboro, in case you all don't know. But we have been doing some really incredible things. Our police chief down there, Chief Norma Hardy, she has been working with the community and the NAACP, and she's not having the same retention problems, nor is she having the same problems with recruiting. Because when you really respect the community that you're in, the community respects you back. So that's one thing that we need to do to make sure we work on our police force. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that all of our plans around public safety include the root cause solutions. So that means that we have to have folks have the mental health care that they need. We need to make sure that the substance use disorder treatment is available not just in Chittenden County, but in every corner of our state. Lamoille County saw the highest increase in overdose deaths this year for the first time ever. And the work that we can do around public safety, no one is saying that kingpins and folks that are causing violent harm should not be held accountable. But we should make sure that when folks are arrested, we are addressing the root causes so that when they are here, we are not increasing the violent crime, but rather actually making supportive and safer communities.
Our next question. VTDigger this month reported on a star soldier in the Vermont National Guard facing allegations of sexual misconduct, including accusations that dated long after the Guard committed to addressing issues of sexual harassment and retaliation. Aaron Hazlett, a 12-year veteran of the Guard, asks, How are you responding to the many women reporting widespread abuse within the Vermont National Guard? Ms. Siegel?
So this is personal for me because one of my staff members and someone that I've known her whole life just came back from the National Guard, was honorably discharged because she experienced sexual harassment while in training. She did not get the support she needed. Her mom and I worked incredibly hard to make sure that they could. Her mom and I worked incredibly hard to try to get her back here, and we were not able to. She was forced to stay in her barracks, to read only religious books, and treated absolutely terribly. It was one of the most trying times I've experienced, and the governor is the commander-in-chief of the Vermont National Guard, and these problems have been going on for a long time, and they need real solutions. It is unacceptable that any mom or any person in the National Guard should ever have to experience something like that because they try to live their dream. This person deserved to fulfill what she had wanted, which was to go on in the National Guard. But the people who did this to her are still there. And in our state, we are finding more and more of these problems. And in my opinion, the commander-in-chief is absent from the solution.
Governor Scott?
Again, I have a great deal of respect for members of the Vermont National Guard and those who serve and put their lives on the line to protect us. First of all, that's men and women alike. But this is unacceptable. I agree. And General Knight finds it unacceptable. They've gone to great lengths to prevent this. The good news is, if there is any good news, is that people are coming forward. And we need to track these down, and we need to eliminate this from the National Guard in its entirety. So it isn't going to happen overnight. I know it's been embedded it's part of their culture, it seems, over the last few decades. But I know that General Knight is doing his ever best to root this out and eliminate it.
Governor, as the Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard for 6 years now, what have you done while in office to address this? We
have worked with General Knight and his team to implement a plan to deal with this. So that has been presented to the legislature. He has gone to the legislature, testified on this, and he's following through on that. So the plan is put in place. They are following up on all of the allegations, and this is something that's, I think, been a change in attitude throughout the last few years. So again, it's not going to fix itself. It's not going to rectify overnight. But I think they're on track to doing just that.
Can I follow up?
Yes.
Sure. I just recently read that there was a commander who went after General Knight already knew about the accusations of sexual assault. And he still sent them to command a unit, and then he came back with more accusations of sexual assault. So maybe the culture has slightly changed, but because it has not changed enough, because that happened and it is not acceptable, a young woman on my staff experienced sexual harassment and was basically kept a prisoner in her barracks for speaking out. So I urge you, regardless of who wins this race, to spend a little more time hearing from the women who experience this in this state, so that you might be able to have some insight as to what it feels like to be in that position as a woman, because I think that that's happening all over our National Guard. It obviously has happened all over our country, and it's something that we need to do better at.
Governor, would you like to respond to that?
No, I totally agree.
Okay, thank you.
The Green Mountain Care Board has been regulating Vermont's healthcare sector for more than 11 years, and the state's all-payer model has been operating for 6. In that time, hospital budgets and insurance premiums have continued to rise year after year, driving up healthcare costs for Vermonters. Do you believe the state's healthcare reform efforts are working, and how do you think they should be improved, Governor Scott?
Yeah, the pandemic certainly caused a lot of disruption in our healthcare system. But again, the good news is it persevered. And I think due to the all-payer system, all-payer model, it made it through with the healthcare system preserved. So we are continuing to move down this track. We're working with the federal government on this proposal, and we still think it's the right approach until we hear something different. Now, I know some would say we need a different, a single-payer healthcare system, but that's only the payment, and that doesn't have anything to do with the healthcare itself. So what we're doing with the all-payer model is we're treating the patients holistically. We're treating with prevention to prevent them from needing services in the future. And by doing that, it cuts down the cost, but we're paying the providers for that prevention instead of for the procedure. So I think it's the right approach. We testified in Congress on this issue. We're one of a few states that are moving forward and working with the federal government on this.
Ms. Siegel?
There's a lot that we need to do to make healthcare more accessible to people. One of the things that we need to do is make sure that we pass and have signed universal primary care, and that should include dental, vision, and hearing, and mental health. In addition to that, we can build a coalition with the states around us to try to get to that single-payer model. We are a small state, and so when we tried to do this, we had a lot of challenge around what the tax structure would be and what Vermonters could depend on for their costs. But right now, people don't get the care they need because they can't access health care. So one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we build that coalition with the states around us and figure out how we make sure healthcare gets to everyone, and we move towards that single-payer model. Additionally, I believe that the all-payer model has not been working. It's just gotten more and more expensive, and we need to do the work we can to make sure that when administrations in hospitals ask for these rate hikes, that those costs are supporting their nurses and their staff, and that bloated administrative costs are not the reason for those rate hikes. Because I think a lot of times the staff in these hospitals are not paid fairly, while the administrations have costs that are way above. And we need to make sure that these costs are clear and that they are going to the care for the patients needed.
Next question. Governor Scott, you've returned to a number of familiar priorities and policy proposals over your 3 terms in office. What would you do differently in a 4th term? Can you name one new proposal, something you've never pitched before, that Vermonters would expect to see on the table next year?
Well, we're not ready we're talking about a lot of different issues, and we have a lot of need, obviously, and we're working on those issues right now. In the event that I do win, we'll be releasing those in January, but I'm not going to get ahead of our process.
Okay. Ms. Siegel, you've led a number of volunteer organizations and campaigns, but you're now seeking to become an executive leading roughly 8,000 state employees. Mm-hmm. Please describe what experience from your professional or personal life that has prepared you for this role.
So I advocate inside the legislature frequently. I work with legislators to introduce bills and work through the process. I testify frequently on those bills. I've also had the opportunity of both working on the GA working group and the Public Transit Advisory Commission, along with working with administrators on both the housing and the overdose crisis separately from that. On a personal level, I have experienced the crises that we're all facing right now, And that's what we need right now, because we know that it's when the people who have experienced the problems that are at the decision-making table that we get the solutions we need. And that's what's missing right now. I would also say that Governor Dean had led a 5-person administration before he became governor, and he did all right for those 12 years. So I think there's people who come from all different experiences and all different backgrounds and are able to lead in these leadership roles. And what I know is that the community members that are struggling, that don't have access to elected leadership, they are incredible leaders across our entire state, and they have the chops to do the job. And what we have to do is make sure that we interject diversity in every level of leadership, because that's how we make the change that we need. We are in a different moment in the world, and we need to be ready for that moment.
Governor, I just want to reiterate for a second. So you're not going to tell voters a new policy proposal until after you are hypothetically
Well, if there's a big policy proposal that we're putting forward, no, I'm not going to, we're not going to talk about that before we're ready to finalize it. So we're talking about a lot of different initiatives, but I think you can count on some of the same initiatives that we've had over the last few years. And really, to grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, protect the most vulnerable, those are the 3 guideposts and the guidelines that we face every single day. So we need to make Vermont more affordable. We need to bring more people in for the workforce. So we are going to continue to work on that. The demographics of our state are our biggest challenge, as I said in my opening statement. And so workforce is a big challenge. CTE is going to be part of the solution. But to give you a specific on that at this point in time, I think is getting ahead of my team.
I'm going to stick with you. Governor, you have not been shy about using your veto pen and have, in fact, set a state record for the number of bills struck down by a single governor. Legislative leadership has said that you did not meet them at the negotiating table before issuing vetoes. In one case, you vetoed a bill that was unanimously overridden by both Democrats and Republicans. This was a major issue, pension reform. How do you think this strategy demonstrates that you effectively advance your priorities in a collaborative manner with the legislature?
Well, again, I've served in the legislature myself, now as governor, lieutenant governor before that, presided over the Senate, but I've always served in the minority. I've never served in the majority. So I have made it known to many who have worked with me that there is a path forward, and I usually tell them what that is. And when we're heading towards a point where I don't think something is going well and I'm going to veto the bill, they know it. I tell them that. So what they tell you may be different, but I know what I tell them. So I don't think, again, let's take the last couple of years during the pandemic. I don't think legislating by Zoom worked out all that well. And I know that it was essential during the pandemic, but I look forward to people getting back together in the State House, working together side by side instead of one small group deciding what goes and what doesn't in the legislature. So I'm looking forward to some more normalcy in the next legislative session.
Missy, I was going to ask, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so first I just want to say that I think it's a lot to accuse our legislative leadership of not being transparent and honest with the press about what they experience from your administration. And it's really important that that our governor, it doesn't matter if you're in the minority or the majority party. As governor, you have to work with everyone. You are the governor of everyone. Even though I frequently disagree with you, you're still my governor, and you still have to work with me. You still have to represent me. And that is something that is really missing from the role that we have right now happening in this administration.
Well, again, anytime I vetoed something, I think if you read the veto message, you will understand there is a path forward. And I lay it out quite distinctly in the veto message. And there have been times when, with all those vetoes, that we've actually passed something that made sense afterwards. So again, you look at the veto messages, not just the veto, and then look for a path forward. And we've been able to accomplish that. And I think that you can talk with many legislators that know my style, and I'm very willing to work together in order to accomplish our common goal.
I'm concerned that people don't actually know the path forward before it gets to your desk. That's what that's what I've heard from legislators.
I'm sorry, we're going to cut it off.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. This has been spirited. We'll now return to candidate questions. Same rules as before. Ask a question, avoid speeches, 90-second responses, please. Governor Scott, you go first.
Yeah, another softball question. For 6 years, I've called on the state to fully eliminate the tax on military pensions because I believe it's a way to attract more people into our state. It has bipartisan support across the legislature, but the hierarchy in the legislature has refused to take it up. Do you support eliminating the tax on pensions for military veterans?
I do.
Great. See, two things we agree on.
You're leaving all the hard questions to us.
Yeah.
I am not. So, in 2018, you vetoed the budget twice. Earlier this year, despite unanimous support from the legislature, you vetoed the pension plan that supported state employees and teachers and was hard worked on as a good, strong compromise. And you did that based on your belief of optional defined contribution plans, which would ultimately cost our teachers and state employees more. Now you've said you're going to push state employees into a Medicare Advantage plan rather than what they've negotiated through collective bargaining. Why do you consistently attack the livelihoods and the collective bargaining of our state employees and teachers when they are really the heroes of our time and one of the most important resources our state has? I'm just curious why there is so much seemingly animus towards the people that work so hard for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're misinformed in terms of the Medicare Advantage plan, and that's for retirees, not for state employees, retirees. And this would actually save them money, save the state money, and give them more benefits. And it isn't the same as what we collectively bargain with the VSEA for state employees, because they're supposed to be the same as what I read in Digger. I didn't hear it from Steve Howard, but I heard it in Digger that they need to be the same. Well, they weren't the same before, and they're not going to be the same now. It's just a different plan for a different group of people. They're on Medicare, so it has to be a different type of plan. This would give them more for less.
But the point is that it was collectively bargained, and that is what is so incredible about the strength of unions, is that they get to collectively bargain and work for the benefits that they need. And so regardless, that's something that you do at the bargaining table.
Questions, not speeches.
Due to them. So what I'm curious about is why don't you sit down at that collective bargaining table when you're doing this? Including retirees' health care because they were state employees.
Well, again, retirees, and this is a better plan for less costs, and they will be better off. But if that's not what they want, that's fine. But it's a better plan. The teachers have done it. Others have done it as well. And we thought it was a good idea. And it doesn't have to go through collective bargaining, we don't believe.
All right, I'm going to cut it off and ask one more question before we get to our lightning round. Incarcerated women and their advocates have been raising alarms about conditions at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility for years. The state is developing plans to build a new women's prison and possibly reconfigure other facilities. Yet many policymakers and advocates have warned that adding too much capacity could lead to higher incarceration rates. How do you believe the state should address the situation at Chittenden Regional and move forward? Ms. Siegel, we'll go with you first.
So we have to, again, address the root causes of why people end up in correctional facilities. We can't work on that issue without also addressing mental health crisis, substance use disorder, and other types of trauma that are happening to folks across the state. In the interim, people have to have a safe place to be, and right now, that is not a correctional facility that is a safe place to be. And so the work that we have to do has to be, again, both and, to make sure that people are safe, not either or.
Governor Scott.
Well, again, as you might remember back 5 or 6 years ago, we proposed a plan to build a new facility. It could have been somewhere we thought, maybe in the Franklin County area, a campus-type approach, a fairly large campus-type approach. But it could be downsized, it could be used in any type of capacity. But the legislature turned it down and weren't interested in moving forward on that. Now, we are moving forward with hopefully a Maine type of model. They have a women's facility that we've been looking at for a number of years, and we worked with the legislature to move forward there, at least conceptually. So we should have been working on this 5 or 6 years ago, but the legislature really wasn't interested.
The legislature wasn't interested because it was going to be built by the same private prison that has been so harmful to people across the state. So that was the industry that was going to build that prison. I spoke out about it then. I wrote a commentary about it then. And it's really not okay for us to bring the private prison industry into Vermont. Yeah. And while they may have just built it, it's still bringing that industry, core civic, in and making sure that we are and giving them funding and resources that we should not give them.
Yeah. Governor Scott.
Well, again, it was just to build it, not to staff it, just to build it. So somebody has to build it.
Hopefully not private prisons.
All right, we are now going to move on to a lightning round. Each of you will have a chance to answer these questions, but please do so in just a few words, even ideally yes or no. If approved by the legislature, would you sign into law a bill protecting out-of-state patients who come to Vermont to seek abortions and the in-state doctors who serve them from prosecution by other states who have outlawed the procedure? Governor Scott.
In concept, yes, if they passed it, but I'd want to know the details. I couldn't say conclusively yes without looking at the provisions and exactly what it says, but conceptually, yes.
Ms. Siegel.
I can say conclusively yes.
Would you sign a law mandating that gun owners lock their firearms and store ammunition separately? Ms. Siegel.
Yes.
No.
Vermont has legalized cannabis. Would you consider decriminalizing or legalizing other drugs? Ms. Siegel.
I believe in removing criminal penalties and increasing access to treatment.
Governor Scott.
One of the bills I vetoed was for us to set the limits of recreational use of things like cocaine and heroin. So, no.
Okay. 10 states in the country have full-time legislatures. Do you think Vermont should join them and have a full-time professional legislature or maintain its part-time citizen legislature? Governor Scott.
Hell no.
Ms. Siegel.
I think this is a really complicated conversation that has too much nuance for me to give you a two-word answer. But overall, we have to look at how we make sure that regular folks can do the job of legislating so that it's not just retirees that end up in those offices.
Right. Quick addendum. Should it at least consider raising legislator pay?
Oh, sure. It could be, in fact, I went in when I was in the legislature and we talked about that. I went into government ops with somebody from across the aisle, and we advocated for more of a contract type of approach, so that you get paid a certain amount for the whole year, regardless. You know, if you shorten the time, you could get paid more.
Too many words, but thank you.
Well, again, I'm in favor of looking at that.
Thank
yes.
you. Ms. Siegel.
I support increasing legislative pay. It still is an issue for someone like me who was the only parent of my child that I would not have had access to that. And so there's more work that we need to do to make sure that that's possible, including childcare.
Should Vermont consider reforming elections to have candidates for governor and lieutenant governor run on the same ticket as in most states? Governor Scott.
Yes.
Ms. Siegel.
No.
Should Vermont shift to 4-year terms for governor? Ms. Siegel.
No.
Yes.
Speaking of gubernatorial terms, should Vermont impart term limits on the governor's office? Governor Scott.
I don't think there's a need to. I think anyone who runs for too long probably shouldn't be in office. So I think there should be term limits throughout. But for governor here, I don't think it's necessary, but I wouldn't resist.
All right. Ms. Siegel?
Yes.
All right. One last question. When was the last time you lived in rental housing? Governor Scott.
It was probably 35 years ago.
Ms. Siegel.
Right now.
Thank you. We'll now offer each of you an opportunity to make a brief closing statement. You'll have 60 seconds. Governor Scott.
Well, again, thank you very much for having us. And the reason I'm running, again, is pretty simple, because my team and I have unfinished business. We need to pick up where we left off before COVID hit and focus on making Vermont an even better place to live, work, and raise a family. We can strengthen our communities in all 14 counties by following through on our historic investments in housing, broadband, climate change mitigation, economic development, infrastructure, and more. We can provide a better future for our kids by doubling down on early care and learning, career and technical education, and trades training. We can fight for a more affordable Vermont, helping people keep more of what they earn so they have more breathing room at the end of the day. And we can continue to show the nation that leadership can be done with respect and civility, and something that I've always practiced. There's no doubt, working together, we've made progress over the last 6 years, and there's still much more to do. And my seasoned team and I are ready for the challenges ahead with vision, common sense, and with respect. Thank you very much again.
Ms. Siegel.
In the last 6 years, things that matter most to Vermonters have not gotten better, they've gotten worse. Vermont has not become more affordable, it has become less. The housing crisis has been barreling at us, and we still do not have a plan. The governor has presided over the most overdose deaths in the history of our state and keeps vetoing the bills. The climate crisis is exploding, and our Public Utilities Commission is preventing progress. What I know is that there are solutions. We don't have to throw our hands up anymore. Together, we can have safe and strong communities. This is going to be a tough fight, but it's not even close to the toughest fight I've had to face in my life, and I'm still standing. And I know that there are Vermonters all across this state who have to get up and fight anyways, even though it's hard. And I'm inviting all of you to fight alongside me and your community and your neighbors to build a brighter and stronger future for our children and the Vermont that we love so much. Because our children are watching, and they need to know that we are ready for this moment. I'm Brenda Siegel, and I would be proud to serve as your next governor.
Thank you. That concludes VTDigger's 2022 gubernatorial debate. We're hosting one final event in our 2022 Digger Debate Series, a lieutenant gubernatorial debate held virtually 1 week from today. Join us next Wednesday at VTDigger.org. I would like to thank both candidates for joining us tonight, as well as the VTDigger staffers who made this possible, including but not limited to Mike Doherty, Paul Heinz, Natalie Williams, Kate Oldney, Libby Johnson, Taylor Haynes, and Juliet Schulman Hall. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Necrason Group. Thanks also to Main Street Landing for hosting us tonight in Burlington. To support our coverage of Vermont government and politics, please visit vtdigger.org/donate. Thank you again, and good night.